Hello and welcome to the final project for Brian Lugo in CIS 3.11. So today I'm going to be talking about the web application firewall from Amazon Web Service. And essentially what this is a type of firewall that is hosted on Amazon servers. So this kind of shifts the paradigm of what is usually supplied by certain security vendors such as say like Palo Alto or Cisco, where they provide you with very large, very expensive units that you need to host and secure and patch on your own servers. The added flexibility with this is that you no longer have to be tied to a certain, say, amount of space or users that can be tied to that particular firewall. This firewall is almost instantly scalable because of the fact that you are using it on a per use basis. So if you needed to scale up or scale down, Amazon gives you that type of flexibility. So essentially how it works is that you have your web application firewall that sits kind of on the periphery of the network for, let's say, your web server. So if you have different computers trying to connect to your web application firewall, what this will essentially do is either set, depending on how you set the conditions, it can either allow access from, say, like a good user who is not doing anything, say, malicious, and I'll get more into that later, or a bad actor, which is doing something that you have defined to not be deemable, or that if they act in a certain way that you don't really want them to get access to your website or web server, you can of course deny that. So the web application firewall essentially sits in between the users that are requesting things, say like over HTTPS protocol, to get content from a web server. So the way I did this is that I had to create a web ACL, and essentially what that is it's called an access control list, which is essentially, the best way to think about it is it can be almost like a list of things that you allow or don't allow. So the way I try to think about it is the web application firewall is almost like the entrance to a very exclusive club. And the access control list can also somewhat kind of be like the bouncer that lets people either get into the club or not. They have a list that deems, okay, what type of individuals are we going to let into this club or not? So what I did here was create this access control list right here, and wait for it to populate. And within that access control list, you had to create certain conditions. So these conditions here, this one, for instance, a block list. So one of the ways that you can try to protect yourself from malicious characters is that if you know that an IP address, which is essentially known to be a bad character, you can add that to the block list. And here in this block list, what you would do is you could either hard code the addresses that you know. So for here, I have every address that comes from 192.168.0.0/22/24, which means essentially every single IP address from 192.168, so 255, would be blocked from this. So again, this is just an example to show what this feature is. You could also use some sort of a created list from, say, certain government organizations such as the NSA or other security organizations such as NIST or say ISACA that give, or the United States government that give you a list of known bad IP addresses, and you can actually code that into here in order to help populate this list as well. So again, this is so that so this rule, this condition is set to essentially look out for this, but it's not until this thing is blocked that it will actually block this IP address. So I have this condition here that if this were to come in, for it to be blocked. Same thing with this size constraint. Essentially what this does is that one of the ways that attackers can access the network is if they give a query, if they give a string query inside of a text box that is too long, they're probably trying to implement some type of malicious code. So I put a condition here that if there is a length of a query string that is greater than 8,192 bytes, that will actually be blocked from the network. So again, this right here, this rule is created so that there's no malicious code, and this length right here I saw was actually one that is considered a best practice. So which is why I chose it to be here in the size constraint. And again, this is the rule that implements that type of condition, because the condition is essentially the idea of what you want to do, and then you can either act on that rule by allowing or blocking. So in this case, I obviously want to block certain query strings that are going to be greater than or equal to 8,192 bits. And again, this other one right here, this SQL operation, so what this is essentially trying to do is block what is known as an SQL injection. And an SQL injection is considered one of the most popular forms of web attacks on web applications. And the way this works is that if, for instance, this web URL here was somehow connected to a database, what it could do would be to insert some sort of SQL code inside of it, and from there gain access to the data that's on the database. So it could try to overload and flood the table so that it could then have all the input taken out from there. Another one is if you have a text box, say, such as this, it could essentially try to do customer table. It could essentially try to do something like this, so which is why I do an SQL block on the HTTP method, which was kind of an example of this. And the query string for SQL injections means that if we have, say, like a sort of box or dialog box like this, or text box, it's going to stop any SQL injections coming from the query string such as this. So if one of these two were to show up, the WAF would then deny further access based upon those parameters. So those two are the main, are all the rules I went through, because I did consider them to be some of the most popular rules when it comes to an access control list. Now, it does seem as though I went through this kind of quick, but if you look at my documentation, it actually took considerable time to pretty much understand most of these concepts and get them all together. And then once this was created, now I can kind of attach this to, say, for instance, a environment such as CloudFront, which so from CloudFront, what you're able to do is add this web ACL onto an environment such as this one. So what I did is I tied my bucket from S3 and I put that into CloudFront on the web, so that I could have the web access firewall kind of be on the periphery of this right here. And essentially what you would do is then put it on here on the web access control list in order to then deem that whenever somebody were to access my website, so this test environment bucket, that web application firewall will have the access control list in order to define whether or not appropriate access should be deemed to that website, depending on the type of parameters that I put in the conditions. So again, if you wanted specifics in terms of how I did it, the best way would be to see my documentation, which is all right here in my report. I kind of go over again what I just did here in terms of my creation of the access control list, defining the parameters. So yeah, if you wanted more specifics, I do have that all there, very detailed of my findings. So thank you again. It's a big learning experience, this, and I think it's going to help me a lot next quarter when I go into internet and network security. So it was great getting into introduction of how it works from a web standpoint in order to make websites more secure, and kind of a way to understand how to base access to a website depending on the actions of the requester. So great, thank you very much.